She shattered everything. My peace, my pride, and even my phone. Standing before the crowd, she thought she could get away with it, but the world was watching, and the truth hit harder than her arrogance. What happened next? Her life spiraled into chaos. Let's start from the beginning. The afternoon sun glinted off Buckingham Fountain, casting shimmering reflections over the bustling plaza. Tourists snapped pictures, kids chased pigeons, and street performers worked the crowd. Right in the middle of it all stood Daniel, a 29-year-old honor guard, towering in his pristine uniform. His boots were polished to a mirror shine, the crisp creases in his pants sharp enough to cut paper. To most passers-by, he was the embodiment of discipline and pride. But beneath the surface, Daniel carried the weight of countless microaggressions and outright prejudice that came with his job. Stand tall, stay composed, he reminded himself, feeling the familiar tension creep up his spine. His post wasn't just about standing still. It was a stage where every move, every breath was judged. Then she appeared. Out of the corner of his eye, Daniel spotted her. Mid-40s, sharp haircut, designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. You didn't need to be psychic to know trouble was brewing. She had the look, an air of entitlement that screamed, "I'm here to make someone's day worse." She marched right up to him, stepping far closer than anyone should. Daniel's training kicked in, his expression unreadable, but his gut told him this wasn't going to end well. "Do you even speak, or are you just a statue?" she sneered, scanning him from head to toe like he was an exhibit. "Who even let you in here? Must be one of those equal opportunity things, huh?" Daniel stayed silent. Not because he didn't have words for her, oh, he had plenty, but he knew better. Responding would only escalate things. Around them, a small crowd began to gather, drawn by her sharp voice and his stoic silence. "Oh, don't give me that too professional to engage act," she pressed on, her voice dripping with mockery. "You're only here because they need to tick some diversity box. Let's be real." The words stung, but Daniel didn't flinch. Years of experience had taught him that restraint was both his armor and his weapon, but restraint doesn't make the sting any less sharp. Then, lowering her voice so only he could hear, she added, "Nobody respects you, you know. You're just here for show, part of the charade." Daniel felt a heat rise in his chest, but he held his ground, staring straight ahead. If she wanted a reaction, she wasn't going to get one. But Karen wasn't done. She reached out and grabbed his pocket, pulling out his phone, an item every guard was allowed for emergencies. Holding it up like it was evidence of some crime, she turned to the crowd. "Can you believe this? Your so-called honor guard can't even follow basic rules." She waved the phone around like a trophy. The murmurs from the growing crowd turned into a buzz. Cameras were out, recording every second. "Ma'am, I need you to return that," Daniel said firmly, his voice calm but authoritative. But Karen, clearly feeding off the attention, smirked and ignored him. "What kind of soldier even carries a phone on duty? You're a joke." Then she did it. With a dramatic flourish, she threw the phone to the ground. The sickening crunch of glass shattering echoed in the air. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel's jaw tightened as he bent down to pick up the pieces, his movements slow and deliberate. Around him, the onlookers whispered, some in shock, others clearly amused by the scene. Karen crossed her arms, a smug expression plastered across her face. "That's what I thought," she said with a haughty chuckle. "Just playing dress-up, aren't you?" For the first time, Daniel looked her straight in the eye. His gaze was piercing, but he said nothing. The weight of her actions, the humiliation, it pressed down on him, but he refused to let her see him break. As the crowd began to disperse, the cameras stayed focused. Every shattered piece of his phone felt like a piece of his pride, lying in fragments on the ground. Daniel stood tall, his composure intact, but deep inside, a storm was brewing. And Karen? She walked away, oblivious to the consequences that were about to come her way. By the next morning, the world had changed, at least for Karen. The video of her humiliating Daniel exploded online, spreading like wildfire. Social media lit up with hashtags calling her out, and her face was everywhere. From coffee shops to dinner tables, people were talking about that lady at the fountain. Comments poured in, ranging from outrage to disbelief. Who even does that in 2025? Imagine being this entitled. She really thought she was untouchable, huh? But it didn't stop there. Internet detectives, in their endless pursuit of receipts, dug into Karen's past and uncovered a treasure trove of problematic behavior. Turns out, this wasn't her first time pulling something like this. Stories from former coworkers and neighbors surfaced, painting a picture of someone who had been stirring up trouble for years. One post stood out, a screenshot from a community forum where Karen had once argued about how diversity hires ruin companies. It was all anyone needed to solidify her new title as the symbol of prejudice. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in his small apartment, his phone lighting up with notifications every few seconds. His inbox overflowed with messages, some from old friends, others from complete strangers. Most of them were supportive. "You handled that way better than I ever could, man. Dude, you're a hero. Don't let her get away with it." Even his family chimed in. "Proud of you for staying calm, son," his mom texted. But despite the flood of encouragement, Daniel couldn't shake the anger bubbling inside him. Sure, the internet was dragging Karen through the mud, but it didn't feel like enough. She needed to face real consequences, not just memes and public shaming. Determined to take action, Daniel contacted a lawyer. His case wasn't just about personal vindication, it was about sending a message. When the court date was set, Daniel felt a mix of nervous energy and quiet resolve. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the walls, their cameras clicking away as Karen walked in, flanked by her attorney. She looked defensive, her jaw tight, but still carried an air of misplaced confidence. Daniel, seated next to his lawyer, kept his expression neutral. But inside, he replayed every word she had said at the fountain, every insult, every condescending glance. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about standing up for everyone who'd ever been humiliated like that. The hearing began, and Karen wasted no time trying to flip the narrative. "It was a joke," she declared, throwing her hands up dramatically. "He's blowing this way out of proportion. People are just too sensitive these days." Her voice dripped with mock innocence, but it only made the tension in the room thicker. The judge, an older African-American woman with a piercing gaze, leaned forward. "Miss Davis," she said, her tone calm but firm. "This is a courtroom, not a stage. Let's stick to the facts." Karen's attorney scrambled to present her case, but it quickly became clear they had no real defense. The video footage, the crowd testimonies, the online backlash, it was an avalanche of evidence they couldn't climb out from under. But Karen wasn't done digging her own grave. During cross-examination, she let slip the words that sealed her fate. "This is just a money grab. He doesn't actually care. He just wants to profit off this." The courtroom gasped. Even her lawyer winced. Daniel's lawyer glanced at him, their expressions saying, "We've got this." Daniel stayed calm, though his fists clenched under the table. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. When the evidence was reviewed, the judge addressed Karen directly. "Miss Davis, the court has reviewed all available materials, and your actions are not only indefensible, but deeply troubling. This isn't about sensitivity. It's about respect, which you clearly lack." Karen's face turned pale. For the first time that day, she looked genuinely uneasy. The judge continued, "I find the plaintiff's claim valid and supported by overwhelming evidence. Your behavior was a blatant act of harassment, and this court will hold you accountable." The room fell silent, everyone waiting for the final verdict. For Daniel, it wasn't just about the ruling. It was about justice finally catching up with someone who had evaded it for far too long. The courtroom was silent as the judge leaned forward, her expression stern yet calm. Karen stood stiffly at the defendant's table, her once confident posture now replaced by visible unease. She fiddled with a pen, her smile wavering like she was trying to convince herself she was still in control. Spoiler alert, she wasn't. "Miss Davis," the judge began, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut through Karen's paper-thin composure, "have you ever stopped to think about the consequences of your words and actions?" Karen let out a nervous laugh, one of those forced chuckles people use when they're caught off guard. "Your Honor, The judge didn't let her finish. "No, I don't believe you have," she said, her tone firm. "Your behavior at Buckingham Fountain wasn't just disrespectful, it was a glaring example of the prejudice that continues to plague our society. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Karen's face flushed red, and she shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her lawyer, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. After a brief recess, the courtroom reconvened, and the judge delivered her decision. The court finds the defendant, Karen Davis, responsible for harassment and emotional harm. She is hereby ordered to pay Mr. Daniel Carter compensation for moral damages. A collective murmur rippled through the room, but the judge raised her hand, silencing it. Additionally, she continued, as part of her sentence, the defendant will issue a public apology, acknowledging her actions and their impact. This will be recorded and distributed to the public. Karen's jaw tightened. For someone who thrived on controlling situations, this was the ultimate loss of power. Daniel, seated at the plaintiff's table, allowed himself a small, satisfied exhale. It wasn't just about the money, it was about accountability. A week later, the day of the public apology arrived. Cameras were set up in the courtroom, reporters buzzing like bees around a hive. Karen stood behind the microphone, her usual sharpness dulled by a mix of embarrassment and frustration. Her face was pale, and she clutched the edges of the podium, like it might steady her spinning thoughts. She took a shaky breath, then began, her voice barely above a whisper. I would like to apologize for my actions at Buckingham Fountain. My words and behavior were unacceptable, and I deeply regret the harm they caused. She paused, looking up briefly to meet Daniel's steady gaze. I understand that my actions reflected poorly, not only on myself, but on the values we should all strive to uphold: respect, decency, and equality. Her words sounded sincere enough, but the tension in her voice betrayed her true feelings. When she finished, the room erupted in murmurs. Some clapped politely, others just stared. Karen gave a forced smile, trying to appear gracious, but everyone could see through the facade. The moment the cameras were turned off, Karen snapped. "This is outrageous," she hissed, her voice dripping with indignation. "You've all turned me into a villain. It's a witch hunt, plain and simple." The court's secretary, standing nearby, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Quietly, he pulled out his phone and hit record. Karen, oblivious, continued her tirade. "He just wanted attention. That's all this ever was. I shouldn't have to apologize for speaking my mind." Within hours, the new footage hit the internet. And if Karen thought the first wave of backlash was bad, this one was a tsunami. People were quick to call out her hypocrisy, and her weak apology only fueled the fire. Major news outlets picked up the story, and her employer issued a public statement distancing themselves from her actions. By the end of the week, Karen was unemployed, her reputation in shambles, and her face a permanent fixture in memes and commentary videos. For Daniel, the whole ordeal was bittersweet. The public apology and legal victory felt like justice, but more than that, it became a symbol of something bigger. He proved that even in the face of blatant injustice, dignity and perseverance could make a difference. As he left the courthouse that day, Daniel felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Outside, a small group of supporters cheered for him, holding signs that read, "Respect matters," and "Justice for all." Daniel nodded at them, a quiet smile on his face. He didn't need to say anything. His actions and Karen's downfall had said enough. What would you have done in Daniel's place? Do you think justice was served? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you or someone you know ever faced a similar situation? Let us know, and don't forget to like this post if you believe in standing up for what's right. This story was created to shine a light on real issues and inspire positive change. Together, we can make the world a better, fairer place.